So recently I've been spending quite a bit of time writing code and much less time filming videos, and I've noticed that the amount of hours I spend coding really changes the amount of productivity or efficiency I'm getting in those hours. What I mean by that is if I spend say 10, 11, 12 hours coding, I'm not necessarily getting as much done per hour as I would if I was only spending 3 or 4. Now I know that seems obvious, but I think there's a really good sweet spot that I've discovered over the past few weeks, and I'm going to share that with you in this video. In fact, what specifically I'm going to do here is try to answer the following questions. What's the minimum amount of time you should spend coding? What's the maximum amount of time you should spend coding? And what is that sweet spot? What is kind of the ideal amount of time to spend per day working on some coding project? Now, of course, this won't be one size fits all. This is really just from my experience and what I've noticed, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments down below. Now, one other thing I've recently realized is that I always have about a 1-minute intro, and at this point in time, I share with you the sponsor of this video. Before we get started, I need to thank Sencha for sponsoring this video. Sencha provides the fastest JavaScript grid and over 140 high-performing UI components that you can use to build stunning applications. With Sencha, you can lower your maintenance cost, build apps faster, and deploy sophisticated-looking, elegant, and enterprise-grade fintech applications with ease. Sencha's grid provides row and column operations, rendering and scrolling, importing and exporting, and much, much more. About 60% of Fortune 100 companies like Apple, Adobe, and Microsoft rely on Sencha and their JavaScript components and libraries, and you can join them today by clicking the link in the description and checking out Sencha for yourself for free. Thanks again to Sencha for sponsoring this video. Now let's get into it. Alright, so the first question I told you I would answer is what is the minimum amount of time you should spend coding in a day? Now, I just want to say that this doesn't really apply to people that only have maybe 20 or 30 minutes to code, and they're kind of fitting coding into whatever else they're doing. I'm really talking about people where their full-time job or their full-time thing is writing code, and they're trying to determine if it's worth it to even begin coding based on the amount of time that they're going to have. Now, this really applies to me because I have a bunch of other stuff that I need to do, usually when I'm writing code. And so I need to decide if, I only have an hour or an hour and a half, if it's actually worth my time to get in and start coding as opposed to doing some other tasks. So with that said, really for me, I think that a decent minimum amount of time to code is about an hour or an hour and a half. Now, I know that might seem like a lot, but really for me, I find that I can't start being productive in a code base or in a coding session until I spend about an hour kind of getting into it, getting my mind into that flow state, getting more familiar with the code, reminding myself of some of the logic and stuff that I may have maybe forgotten from the past day or that I need to conceptualize before I can start actually writing something. And for me, really between 60 and 90 minutes is usually how long it takes before I start really getting productive, being more fluent on the keyboard. I kind of know what I'm doing, and I'm actually writing a good amount of code in the time past that. So that's what I'm going to say for a minimum amount of time, at least for me. For some of you, it may only take 5 or 10 minutes. For some of you, it may take 2 hours. You do need to figure that out, but usually I won't actually start doing any coding unless I know I'm going to have a minimum of an hour, maybe even 90 minutes to be able to get something done. Because again, until I get to that hour mark, I'm usually not being very productive, and I'm just not yet in that flow state, which as we all know is super important when it comes to coding, because you have to be very focused to really be productive and get a lot of non-buggy and accurate code out. So let me know in the comments if you guys agree with this. Do you think that's a decent minimum? How long does it take you to get into your flow state? And when do you start to really feel productive when you're writing code? All right, so now we'll move on to question number 2, which is what is the maximum amount of time that you should start coding? So as I stated before, usually I start to get productive and actually kind of do a lot of work as soon as we get to that 60 to 90 minute mark. Now, once I get to that point, I'm usually quite productive for 2 to 3 hours before I start to see any kind of drop off in the productivity. So you really have, at least I really have, a solid 3 or 4 hours per day where I'm getting a ton of code out. This is good code. It's high quality. I'm not tired yet, and I'm confident in what I'm writing. Now, as soon as I start to get past 3 or 4 hours, so I'm at, let's say, the 4-hour mark from when I've started to code, usually I'm okay. I can still write some decent code. My productivity doesn't fall a ton, but I do start to see a drop off. And every kind of hour past that 4-hour mark, if I was trying to quantify this, I'd say I'd be maybe 10 or 15% less productive. So by the time I'm getting to maybe 7 or 8 hours of coding, I'm now at a point where I'm maybe at half the productivity I was a few hours ago. And at that point, I don't really find it worth it to continue coding unless I really need to get something done. Because again, I'm not being very productive and my time is probably better spent in a more low effort type of task that doesn't require the amount of focus that coding and working in kind of a large, complicated code base does. So for me, I really think that a decent maximum for writing code in a day, especially if you're not taking a major break in between coding sessions, is between 6 to 7 hours. Now, that might even be a lot. I'm sure many of you, by the time you get to even 3 hours or 4 hours, are probably burning out already. You've probably exerted a ton of focus, a ton of, muscle, brain power, and you're getting tired at that point, and that's totally reasonable. For me, I'll usually still kind of push forward, even if I'm being a little less productive, just so I can get some more code out. And that's why I usually try to cut my sessions at, again, kind of that 6, 7, maybe 8 hour mark, depending on the day and depending on how much I need to get done. Now, all of this does change a little bit if you are taking breaks throughout when you're coding, and depending on the length of that break, right? For example, probably the best days I have coding are when I wake up nice and early, maybe 7 a.m., start coding by 7:30, I'm kind of into it by 8:30, and I have a nice 3 hours of productivity. That brings me until about noon, and then I take like a 1 or 2 hour break. I'll have lunch, maybe watch a few videos, maybe do something really low effort that doesn't require a ton of thinking, and then jump back into coding at 2, 2:30 and code until maybe 6 or 7 p.m., which at that point I would then stop for the day and do whatever I'm going to do. Those are when I'm the most productive. I have a really solid break, enough to kind of refresh the brain and to maybe even have a nap or something, so I'm no longer kind of exhausted or burnt out from the coding session. So that is what I feel like for the maximum. Let's go with, 7 hours just to kind of give a definitive answer here. Again, I know many of you are probably going to be before that number, but if we're picking an absolute maximum for me, I think that's a really solid place to kind of stop, especially if I've only been taking short, 5 or 10 minute breaks and not had kind of this large lunch break or this large time to kind of regroup, regenerate, and get back into the coding. All right, so now that I've answered those two questions, I will answer the final question, which is what is the ideal amount of time to spend coding in a day? Now, my answer for this is going to be between 5 and 6 hours. Now, for a lot of people, I have a feeling they're going to say something between 3 or 4 or between 4 and 5. For me personally, I find that 5 to 6 is really good and I'm getting quite a bit of work done while still staying productive and not really burning myself out or being too fatigued. So let me just walk through kind of why I came up with that number. So as I said before, a really kind of definitive minimum for me is about an hour. I'm not going to write any code unless I have at least an hour to get some stuff done. And once I get to that hour mark, I'm usually fully in the code base. I'm very focused. I'm at my maximum productivity. I'm usually able to maintain that productivity level. So let's say 100% for between 3 to 4 hours. So by the time I'm getting to 4.5 hours, there is some drop off in productivity for me that I notice. I start to get a bit tired. I'm less focused. It requires maybe more energy or more thinking to solve some complicated problems. However, I'm still probably at 80%, 75%, 70% productivity. And to me, it's still worth it to keep working at that point. It's not until I get to that 6 hour mark where I start to see a more significant drop off. And by the time I'm at 7, 8, etc., I'm now at maybe 60%, 50% productivity. And at that point, my time is probably better spent doing something else that's not as intense, maybe as coding, not as, focus intensive. And I would then go and do that. Now, as I said before, this really all changes based on the way that you're taking breaks. For me personally, when I'm in my flow state, when I'm really coding and nice and focused, I don't like to take breaks. I like to just power through. Sometimes I won't even eat lunch. I'll just go because I really want to get everything done. And I know that if even I take a 5 or 10 minute break, especially if I don't have a bug or something in my program, I could lose complete focus and it might take me another few minutes to get back into the code base. Now, I know some other people are completely the opposite. They're really good at taking, 5-minute breaks every half an hour or something like that. That helps them focus. That helps them, stay motivated in the coding. And that's what works for them. For me, I like to just power through and kind of go as long as I can until my efficiency starts to really drop off. Maybe I take 1 or 2 small breaks in that time. But generally, I'm coding the entire time until I'm just too fatigued or my productivity is too low to kind of warrant or justify going forward. So there you go. That is my answer. The ideal amount of time, again, is going to be about 6 hours, at least for me. I think for many of you, it's probably going to be closer to 4 to 5. And I just want to give you kind of something you can look at if you want to see some real evidence of this or anecdotal evidence of this. So I've done a lot of coding live streams on this channel. I've done some that are 4 hours long. I've done some that are 8 hours long. I've done 10, I've done 12, I've done 18 hours. And in those streams, it's a very interesting kind of psychological experiment to watch me in the first, let's say, half an hour, to watch me at the 3-hour mark, and then to watch me at like the 10 or 11-hour mark. You can just see by the time I'm past 8 hours, I'm completely exhausted. I'm not as motivated as I was before. I'm getting really very little work done. I'm having all kinds of bugs and trouble. I'm getting very frustrated. It's very difficult for me to communicate, especially when I'm trying to talk to like a live chat while I'm coding. Whereas you go to like the 2 or 3 hour mark and it looks like I'm like super energized, you know, I'm talking all the time, I'm going very fast, I'm coding like, you know, very quickly compared to later in the live stream. And it's always funny for me to go back and kind of reference those different points. And it reminds me that, hey, once you get to this point, it's really not worth it to continue. And of course, I'm still going to do these live streams. They're fun. You guys enjoy them. And it's an interesting kind of coding challenge, but I would never recommend to anyone coding for longer than 8 hours at a time unless they had some massive deadline that they really needed to get done. So with that said, I do think I'm going to wrap up the video here. I am very curious to hear what you guys think about this. I have a feeling a lot of you are probably going to disagree with me on the ideal amount of time to code. That's why I tried to preface many times in this video that everything I'm saying is really just from my experience and kind of the way that I feel about it. So please do leave a comment down below. Let me know what your ideal amount of time to code is when you feel most productive, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in another one.